Hello. So this is an introductory lecture to anthropology. When you think of anthropology, I think you have to think of culture. And next year you'll have the ability to take an anthropology course, perhaps a cultural studies course. And some people will say that cultural studies is the death of anthropology. I didn't take a cultural studies course before, so I'm not totally sure of the differences, but often we'll see that all three of the social sciences that we look at, whether it's psychology, sociology, or anthropology, we're all looking for the same thing, to find out why people do what they do and to study human behavior and human society. So there's some small differences, but at the end of the day, I think all the social sciences look for the same end goal. So as I go along, the screen here, you have a picture, the screenshot here, you have a picture of the document that you just uploaded. So you will fill in the blanks as I go along, and I'll try to pause, or actually you have the ability to pause me, which is probably something my in-class students would like. I think they'd like a mute button as well, to pause and fill it in. And as I said in the note above, you would also want to add notes or add details that maybe aren't on this screenshot per se, or just summaries of some of the other tangents, I guess, or other examples I give. And by doing that, by making your learning more active, I think your learning will improve that much more. So the crux, the main part of anthropology, is the detailed observation of cultural groups. So anthropologists often use the participant observation technique, and this is where observers live and participate in a small group or village. So this would be, let's say I am going to go study the Maasai warriors in Kenya. So I would go and hopefully I would pass an ethical board and allow the study to happen and get permission and such, and we'll talk a little bit about ethics later on, and study their interactions and see what's going on. Now, I'm a 6'4", 330-pound man, and I'm also very, very white. Going into Kenya and living amongst the Maasai warriors, and me observing them, first of all, is that ethical? And I think that brings up a lot of ethical debate, but will their behavior be altered in the presence of the researcher? So will the Maasai warriors act normal when I'm there researching them? And researchers feel that behavior won't be altered, that's the next blank there, won't be altered with their presence. So I often give the example of, I don't know in your home high schools if principals come into your classroom and watch the teacher teach or watch the students learn. We're under a district review. It's a process where the superintendents and some of the trustees and the higher ups at the board level come and have been watching us teach over the last few years. And so in a way, I think they're anthropologists looking for the culture of learning that the teacher establishes. When they're here, I think my behavior is much different. I am much more conservative, much more proper, and I think the kids are kind of on the best behavior. So I don't know how authentic this observation is. Now, if a principal or a group maybe stayed with the class for a few days, a few weeks, maybe that behavior will become more normalized. But essentially that's what anthropologists will do. Now, it doesn't have to be extreme. If I could go to another high school as a cultural anthropologist and start teaching and What I'm really doing is studying the social interactions of the teaching culture, and look for symbols that they use, look for stresses that they go under. And then often and this might not be the best example, but if you saw the old 21 Jump Street or the new 21 Jump Street, it's essentially undercover police officers who look young, and they infiltrate a social group, so that could be a high school, in an effort to find criminals. So it's like kind of being like an undercover cop. So now it shouldn't be that undercover, but you'll see stories of or famous anthropological studies of people infiltrating the Hells Angels biker gang. Or one of my former students, their prof has infiltrated a group out in BC and studied the idea of hook pulling, and that's the practice of like piercing the skin and hanging from being elevated or suspended by hooks on a tree or something, and has talked about that culture. Really interesting. And I'm not promoting that culture or whatnot, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a second. One of the things that anthropologists do is that they test intuition. So as humans, we use our basic logic and general assumptions to come up with our version of the truth. To find truth, we must understand that intuitions are beliefs and not truths. So they test these intuitions. So intuitively, many think that the death penalty would bring down the murder rate. But social scientists have in fact found that the murder rate did not decline in areas that have capital punishment. So some conservative thinkers would have a problem with that, and I think even some teachers would have a problem with that. But social scientists prove that that's not a truth, it's just a belief. Some people believe that certain schools would improve attendance if the administration or the principals became more quote-unquote hardcore and gave detentions and consequences. Is there any stats to back that up? Well, anecdotally, the one example I have is the crime rate in Sri Lanka. No, not Sri Lanka, Singapore. Apparently it's a pretty militant state that bans things like chewing gum and graffiti, and they are quite, I keep wanting to saying hardcore, but they're just very, the punishments really are intense. So they have a very, very low crime rate. But in some states that we see to the south of us, murder rate is quite high in the United States, and has a gun murder rate exponentially higher than what we have in Canada. So yeah, they would be testing intuitions. I guess another example, I think intuitively I would believe that doing homework would improve class marks. But that's a belief, that's not a truth. Is there any proof that correlates time spent on a subject outside of the classroom correlates to a higher mark? Intuitively, I think so, but I don't know, I don't have proof to back that up. So later on in the lesson, I'm going to ask you about other intuitive beliefs that we have. One of the other things anthropologists do is they compare cultures. And this can be very dangerous, as we never want to say one culture is better than another. I think sometimes we do, though, and I think that's very dangerous. But function of anthropology is to increase our knowledge of what it means to be human by comparing cultural differences. That next blank there is cultural differences. So, and I think this is a fairly weak example, but the idea of kinship or family relationship is different across cultures. So somebody in the Western culture, two people with the same father but different mother would be considered kin, considered family, but in other cultures they would not be considered relatives at all. I take the example of tipping a server or a waitress at a restaurant. In Western society, it is, if you don't tip, you'd be frowned upon. You're supposed to give 15% or whatnot to your server. And I don't even know if it matters if you got good service or not. You're still supposed to leave a 15% tip. However, in countries in the Southeast Asia, or the Southeast Asian area, leaving a tip is almost like saying to the worker that the tipper is better than the worker and is flaunting their wealth in front of them. And if you ever saw a movie called Waiting, I think Ryan Reynolds is in it, and there's an instance where there's a guy working in a restaurant and one of his old high school friends comes in and leaves him a $100 tip. And the guy's actually offended by that because he feels that this former high school classmate is flaunting his wealth. I think there's other examples. Apparently in like the mixed martial arts culture, there's some factions that bow before they fight or compete as a sign of respect, but in others a bow would be seen as disrespectful. So I think you have to be careful of certain cultural norms and cultural cues when you travel. Another example, most family societies are based on patriarchy, which is the power of father and husband, and I always remember patriarchy because it says pa in it, papa. Okay, so that's male dominated. Navajo people has the mother being at the head of the family, and that would be matriarchy. And again, you remember that because it's your mama, it's your ma. So anthropologists consider that or they study, and that's really poorly worded. They would consider what is normal, what is rude, what is funny, what is beautiful, what is romantic. And in Western culture, and in my belief, I think one of the biggest insults is if someone has ever spit in your face. And we've seen that in some sports. Years ago, Hall of Fame baseball player Roberto Alomar spit in the face of an umpire, and it was a travesty, and they thought that was the most disrespectful thing that one could do. However, if you watch My Big Fat Greek Wedding, or have been to a Greek wedding, often when the bride walks down the aisle, the congregation spits or makes the spitting sound onto the bride. I don't think they actually spit, but and that's a sign of good luck. So there are two different examples of cultural differences. And if anyone is from the Greek culture and want to clarify that for me, please do so. And we could look back at historically of what was considered beautiful or sexy. Hundreds of years ago, it might have been like a really large woman would be considered the most beautiful form. And then, 10, 13 years ago, we saw a definition of beauty that was very, very petite, like a Christina Aguilera, or just almost like skin and bones. And now I often wonder, is beauty, or the celebrity beauty, more a full-figured person like a Beyonce or like a Jessica Simpson? I guess there was a time where a sign of masculinity was how much gas a man could expel, and I don't think that's a sign of masculinity in Western culture. Actually, I know it's not. So as I've talked about before, previously in this, I don't know, do I call it a podcast? I don't know what it's called. They use the participant observation technique. So we're living with a group and we're collecting statistics. How many times do they shake hands? Do they fist pump? Is there any sort of exchange in greeting? They would interview people and have a compilation of detailed field notes of the cultural exchange. The fieldwork is called ethnography. It is the scientific study of human race and culture. Of human race and culture. So there are schools of thought in each of the three social sciences that we'll look at. We'll look at schools of thought within that. And yeah, school. But sometimes I have really bad clip art. Sometimes, probably all the time. So functionalism, you always have, when you look at the school of thought for functionalism, so the main part of functionalism is to look at to ask what is the function, or what is the purpose of any given social institution or social action within a given culture. So functionalists say that we have all these problems in a given society, and we create things trying to meet with physical, and that should be psychological, needs of a given society. So, there will be some care facilities, maybe some form of religion to deal with our emotional needs or our spiritual needs. And I'm saying this as almost as we're looking at this scientifically, and I don't mean to be unreligious here or speak out against religion. This is just what the functionalists would say. I think religion has a bigger role in society and such. And yeah, I'm just talking myself into a back corner here. But customs and practices serve a purpose in providing stability. So if we look at religion again, and we look at it and we take away our personal beliefs, but religion provides stability. In times of tragedy, people can turn to religion for hope, for guidance, and hopefully that serves as a stabling, comforting force. Now, there are other things that provide stability and comforting forces. I mean, you could look at the role that food plays in, and I'm an emotional eater, so when I'm stressed, when I'm happy, I turn to the Pop-Tarts, I turn to whatever, and that provides stability for me, which is probably unhealthy. Anyways, the crux, and there's that word again, is to look at these social, or the function of these institutions. What does it do? What is the social function of the education system? What is the social function of any given class? So anthropologists in the functionalist school of thought look to explain the role, but not judge customs. And this is very difficult. And earlier I had given the example of the hook pulling, people who pierce their skin and are suspended by their skin. Okay? If you don't know what I'm talking about, do a Google image search of hook pull. But you don't have to. It's so hard for me not to judge that standard. And I want to say, oh, that's weird, but we're not supposed to. Or, oh, that's so wrong. But anthropologists would say it's not. We were just trying to explain why that happens. Now, some would argue there are some practices that are wrong. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. So some of the typical questions that functionalists would ask in the school of thought here: what purpose in society does institutions serve, and how does the institution contribute to the overall well-being of society? Now, structuralism, sometimes I really have a hard time getting my head around this, but according to structuralists, the human mind works or functions on the principle of binary opposites, so that the human mind tries to always put things into opposing forces, such as day and night, male and female, good and evil. Now, all cultures develop complex rules about what items are good and bad. Now, items themselves aren't inherently good and bad, but they're given meaning of when they are good and bad. So one of our old textbooks gives an example of wearing boots outside is good, but wearing boots inside, full of manure or sand or salt, and you put them up on the coffee table, that would be seen as bad. In terms of behavior, I always find it a little bit ironic. In a classroom, we're trying to create critical thinkers that challenge the status quo, that question facts, question authority. So we're trying to make a culture of critical thinkers. But the moment that those critical thinkers question a teacher's authority, then that is seen as defiance, and that is seen as a behavior that needs correction, a behavior that might need attention. So I find that very ironic. We're trying to build critical thinkers, but the moment those critical thinkers judge authority in the school, that it's defiant. So I find some irony in that. So by understanding the human mind, anthropologists analyze cultures and societies to see how the structures of culture meet human needs. Now, if a culture no longer, I've got some spelling issues today. If a culture no longer meets the needs of its members, then the culture will die. Right? So, have there been certain cultures that have died off? I guess there's been cultures that have died off because another culture invaded that culture and killed it off. Off the top of my head, I can't think of a culture that died off because it no longer served the needs of its members. So anthropologists will seek out and try to explain the rules in which people find something that's good or evil, and try to explain when certain things are good, when certain things are evil. I think I missed a blank. I think I missed this one. I'm sorry. Anthropologists consider what is beautiful, rude, romantic, funny. Okay, I'm pretty sure I missed that. So they consider what is normal, rude, funny, beautiful, romantic. Okay, I think I need a time out here. Okay. Cultural materialism. Cultural materialism, it suggests that material factors are the starting point to understanding a society. According to cultural materialists, technological and economic factors are the most important in molding a society. The true explanation of culture can be derived by examining members' decisions regarding human reproduction and economic production. So how we make the population and how we produce our economy is really the infrastructure on how everything else develops. So we have three levels, and again, I'm not too comfortable in this school of thought, but we have three levels of society, and the first one is the infrastructure. So how goods and services are provided, how people are produced, and from that we create social classes and the economy and social classes and political mechanisms, and then that dictates our mental processes and our behavior, and kind of like the icing on the cake, the music, the art, and the recreation. So each of these will dictate each other. Okay, I kind of like to look at it as a cake, which is also coincidental, I suppose, or very predictable. So they typically ask, why do populations, or how do populations and economic factors influence the type of culture that develops? And many of you in your Let Me Write activity talked about how they feel that our Western Canadian culture is dictated by material items. It's become superficial or artificial. So that was pretty interesting. So there would be three grandparents. I think she actually died in 2006 or earlier. I'll have to check that. Mary has passed away. Oh my God. Sorry. Franz Boas. So these are the three grandparents or what we used to call founding fathers, but I would call them the founding grandparents of anthropology. Franz Boas, he did field work with the Canadian Inuit, and his legacy essentially says that learned culture, or what he would argue is that learned culture, not biology, largely determines human behavior. So it's the whole nature-nurture debate. Are we born violent? Do we learn violence? Did I learn to be anxious and stressed all the time, or did I learn that behavior from my mom? How can you prove that? I don't know. So he would say that behavior is largely dictated by culture rather than biology. However, if we went to a biology class, genetics class, I would think they would say the opposite. Now, he also said that culture should be judged by its own standards, not Western ones. So this is difficult for me. What if there's a culture that practices scarification, and the scarification kind of like a tattoo, and what if that hurts a given individual? See, for me, I want to say that's wrong if it's hurting them, but is it my job to say it's wrong, or just to explain that? The Maasai warrior and how the boy becomes a man is an interesting process, where a boy is circumcised at 13 or teenage years and he cannot flinch. And to me, that's I have a hard time seeing that, and it makes me kind of weak in the knees and such. So again, we try to see a culture but not judge it. Very difficult to do. Leakey, one of the best names out there, Louis and Mary Leakey, they studied the human species in Kenya, and they found civilizations from 100 to 200,000 years ago and pioneered the field of physical anthropology. I guess some people call it bioanthropology. So they're looking at, facial features and how certain parts of the body have evolved to fit the needs of a given member. And I'm not educated at all in evolution, but how have our bodies changed to fit the needs? Or have our teeth got stronger? Has our skin got softer? I often wonder what has happened to our heads that's causing this many concussions to come out? Or is it just because we're able to diagnose it better? Or has something physically happened to our heads that has made us a little more susceptible to concussions? Now, if you go into forensics, you might take a course in physical anthropology, and a dated practice would be, and I don't think they use this anymore, but the idea that certain facial features dictated or predisposed you to certain criminal behaviors, whether it's distance between the eyes, length of nose, certain type of chin. I don't think that's used anymore. And finally, Margaret Mead. Margaret Mead studied Aboriginal peoples in the Pacific Islands, and she asserted that gender roles are not universal. Gender roles are not universal. So stereotypically, we see in Western world, we see women as the nurturer, the emotional gender, whereas the man is the assertive, the stoic gender. But she says that in other cultures these roles are reversed, that the man is the emotion, the nurturer, and the women are the assertive ones. So She says this varies. And like Bose, she advocated that personalities are influenced by the societies in which we live. All right, that makes me think, I'm a pretty anxious and stressful guy. What if I lived in the Caribbean? Anytime I've been to the Caribbean, of course, I'm on vacation, but the population there seems so relaxed and so unscheduled. I wonder then if actually I'd be frustrated by that and get more stressed, or if I would actually be able to relax. I don't know. So that's a brief introduction to anthropology. Next, I'm going to get you to watch a TED Talks. It's very short, so don't worry. It's on Amber Case, and she would be an anthropologist, and she's actually called a cyborg anthropologist, or calls herself that, and talks about some very interesting things, and something that we'll talk about in Unit 4 about technology and the evolution of technology, which always used to be an extension of some sort of human quality, meaning like the wheel is an extension of humans walking. Now is technology being an extension of not a physical deed, but more mental deeds. So sorry I was kind of all over the place, but I hope this method of providing material once in a while is just a nice change from just reading the material. Thanks for listening. I hope you